HR Unboxed with Natalie and Faye.
Welcome to episode 1 of HR Unboxed from Reeboks HR, and it's great to be joined in the studio by Natalie and Faye from Reeboks HR. How are you doing today?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Yeah, really well, thank you. Pleased to be here.
Excellent. So the podcast today, we're going to be talking about the exciting world of HR, and people might have this preconception about HR that it's all very serious and stuffy, and then they see you guys and they're like, hang on a minute, you don't look like typical HR people. Is that kind of the ethos of Reeboks HR?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. I've spent nearly 20 years in a corporate setting before I set out in my HR journey as a solo. And I often found that people wouldn't approach HR people that were in suits or in a room at the dark end of a corridor somewhere. So you'll never find us in suits. You'll find us very much dressed down and, very much as part and on the level with people, really. So yeah, and that works really well with the clients that we service.
I think the first question has to be, what actually is HR? Is there a definition of HR? What would you say your role kind of involves?
Where do you start? We cover the length and breadth of what we call the employee life cycle. So it can be anything that walks in through the door every day, and Faye and I are met with different challenges. It's really quite difficult to put a full definition. If you look in the dictionary, obviously HR is there as a service function within a business to support employees within an organisation. Is, a very dressed down version of what it is, but ultimately that's what it's seen as quite often. But the way that we work is much more commercially focused, and we're there to support the employer to have the best practices in place so that they don't get into trouble and all of the scary headlines that you see with all the tribunal cases. So we're there to protect them and to support them. But if they're doing that in the first place, they're doing right by their employees. So that's where we come in.
Is it more tricky for small businesses to kind of negotiate the minefield of HR? Because there's a lot of potential pitfalls, aren't there?
I think for smaller companies, I think the first thing is they think, if I've got under 5 employees, maybe I don't need HR. And sometimes that can be where they become slightly more unstuck, because even having one person on board, 10 people, 20, 50, 100, sometimes there's that need for HR, and definitely a need to follow the processes and procedures that comes with. It typically comes from taking on and onboarding your first employee. What does that compliance look like? Are you getting your right to work checks done? Are you getting your new starter, capturing all the correct information to start them with the company? And then that takes you right through the employee life cycle. So whatever that looks like, and however big or small the team is, that typically from a small business, I don't probably think that they recognise how much support they might need. And then that's where we can come in to help with that.
Yeah. It's usually when things go wrong that they get in touch with us and say, Natalie, Faye, this has happened. Help, what do we do? Which is a great place to start. We'd rather people call us and say that what's happened has actually happened, rather than try and cover it over and say, well, it's going to be okay. And we're like, there's risk. So we need to try and do our best to mitigate that risk for the employers so that they are doing the right thing and doing the right practices in the first place.
Do you think a big part of that is that sort of head in the sand approach, where companies hope that it'll just go away if they ignore it and forget about it, and think, oh, well, that person that works for me is a nice person. They wouldn't ever do anything, legal because they can. But actually, it's not about that, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of, and again, we come back to maybe smaller companies, they employ friends and family. And typically in that sense, you don't believe that somebody that you get on with well, maybe outside of work, would ever turn and potentially put a claim against the company, because that's the severity of what this can do. But whatever that looks like in terms of the relationship, there's an employee-employer relationship there. So again, the compliance has to be followed. No matter if they're your best friend, family, sister, brother, whatever that looks like. I mean, you see claims go to tribunal of wives that haven't been paid national minimum wage and various bits and pieces. So yeah, I think the rule of thumb is to take everybody on that employee basis and don't just assume that you're covered by the fact that you're friends.
Yeah. Well, we recently saw a case, I believe it was in South Wales, between a husband and wife that were running a corner shop, and the wife hadn't been paid for so long that she then took her own husband to tribunal, which is quite a huge thing to do. We've seen it in other cases as well with the small family run garage that was in the West Midlands. 47,000 that payout was, and we're not talking small figures. And I think there is this misconception around small businesses don't get the same level of reward as like large scale businesses, but if you're talking about salaries and statutory entitlements, the figures can be huge.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that we're going to be doing on this podcast is using real life examples of what can actually happen. And I find it fascinating when things go wrong and you just think, yeah, what could they have done to avoid that happening? There was a case in the news recently about a company who sent a get well card to somebody that was on sick leave, and I think that didn't end well for the company. It's just little things like that you don't imagine that's going to be a problem, and then it is.
Yeah, we've seen cases actually in the States, and what we find is eventually the cases will mirror what happens in the US sometimes. So there's been cases over there about birthdays, and people don't want to have the big shenanigans on their birthdays in the office, or the big team lunch out, or the cakes and the gestures. A lot of people can be quite private with their lives, so it's about understanding your people a lot more, and this is one of the fundamentals that we find that people don't get right. So when you're introducing a new line manager to their team, the first priority should be getting to know your people. Once you know your people, you're able to actually start working more closely with them, but also understand what those boundaries are, because they're so individual to people. Some people love the whole, but it's my office birthday, and they'll have like an office birthday and then an official birthday, kind of like the king, really. Yeah. So yeah, we like to have those celebratory moments, and for some people that's appropriate, but for others it's just a no-go area. So understanding the people is where the strength is.
I think not everybody likes the numbers that you get on birthday cards. Sometimes it's better to kind of keep that a little bit more discreet.
Yeah, I can say that. I'm 40 now, so I know.
It's a big one.
Yeah, it was a big one in April. So and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know how I would have felt about all the 40 cards, to be honest.
It's the giant balloons that get me. There's no need for that. What are some of the kind of the common pitfalls that companies make in HR? What would you say are the most common things that you get called up about?
Okay, so I could get my list out. I guess one of the biggest things is probably waiting until a situation has massively erupted, as opposed to dealing or potentially having those slightly more difficult conversations initially to kind of nip something in the bud. But no, sometimes things can progress and go on and become something a lot bigger than it necessarily needed to be. Another I'd probably say is to do with processes and procedures, or maybe rather the lack of that. So sometimes they'll say, I want this particular thing doing, what's the quickest way? And I really understand, businesses are busy, companies, people have got things to do, and they see this as a quick problem they want to go away, but it sometimes just isn't the case, and we can't wave a magic wand, so to speak, to make that happen.
But I think, if you're running a business, you've got a lot of balls to juggle. There's lots going on, and sometimes writing a huge long policy about something that you ought to do, but you think, who is actually going to read our whistleblowing policy on the website? Do we actually need one? Is it that the sort of thing that actually you do need to put the time into that, because it can come back and bite you if you don't do it?
Yeah, I think so. Having the policies there ultimately is there to protect the business. And that's, again, where people think, oh gosh, it's a lot of time, a lot of effort for things that people don't read until you need it. So whistleblowing, we're seeing increases in cases in that. I'm pleased that you brought that up. So the main thing is that you don't really have to try and reinvent the wheel by doing these things or writing these policies and procedures yourself. That's what we do. So Faye and I, we wouldn't even dream of doing, the company accounts, because we're not an expert in that. And it's very much the same should be treated when we're looking at HR processes and procedures, because we know what we're looking for straight away. We can see where this sits. And yes, it might be a bit of bedtime reading for people, but, one of our biggest selling services is our handbooks and our bespoke template documents and all of this sort of thing that businesses actually need. We don't do HR for HR's sake, and that's why a lot of people like working with us. So yeah, having them is absolutely essential, but you don't need all of the policies.
So when a company comes on board, would you do like an HR health check and say, right, this is what you're doing well, this is what you need to improve, these are all things that we can help you with?
Yeah, all of these things. So our first port of call is always our health check. So it's basically like a mini audit. If anyone hasn't, or anyone listening hasn't had a HR health check before, what we do is we do a mini audit to see what you do and don't have. We're not here to judge and do that disappointed dad face that says, oh gosh, you should have this, that and the other, and that shaking disappointment head that they probably expect from a typical kind of HR
but surely
function.
That's the reason they've come to you, because they know that they've got work to do. If everything was perfect, they wouldn't need your help.
Yeah, some are more open than others, which is absolutely fine. But once we explain the method to the madness behind it and say, well, actually, if you have this process buttoned down, you're going to save yourself some money. So we find that there's a lot of things that throughout looking at processes that have been going wrong, and people have been paying out a lot more than what they should have been from their businesses, whereas actually we can save them that money because, again, we know what we're looking for. So it could be a missed probation, it could be somebody not calculating or monitoring holiday entitlement, for example, or somebody trying to pay someone out of their statutory right of holiday entitlement. That's another common one. So if they don't have the time throughout the year to take their holiday, they're like, oh, don't worry, I'll just have it in my paycheck. And you're like, no, no, because they are entitled to that time off. And then you find that the employee gets burnt out. We then see mental health issues. The little actions snowball to the biggest issues. So nipping it in the bud is always the premise that Faye and I work on.
I think that's a really interesting one with like annual leave. And I think a lot of the time, I mean, I'm rubbish at this because I always fail to take the right number of days off. And it's either you feel like you can't afford to take holiday because you think that there'll be so much work to do when you get back because your work won't be properly covered while you're off, or it's just really inconvenient to take the time off because everybody else is booking a holiday when you need to book the holiday, and you just think, well, I won't bother then if you have. And then you get to the end of the holiday year. Are you legally entitled to carry it over in those circumstances, or do you just use it or lose it?
So some policies will be use it or lose it. Some of the clients we work with have enhanced holiday entitlements where they would be able to carry over. Say some of them tend to have like 5 days maximum, and then they have to take that because they might have a busy year end. Christmas can be quite a busy time for some businesses. So they tend to say, well, it's our busiest month, so would you mind taking it in January, February, or extending it over to the latest is the Easter break for most. So have that really as a cut-off time, so to speak. But the statutory entitlement, Faye does a lot of monitoring with our clients through a system, and she can see if people have been taking their holiday or not. And if they haven't, we can give them a nudge and say, you really need to think about booking some time off. But I think, Faye, you'll probably agree with me. We've been seeing it get worse with people that are working from home because they don't necessarily grasp that they're working, if that makes sense. They've either got a space in their lounge or office at home, and they don't really see it as working because they have that flexibility during the day, just to get something from the postman, or to make themselves that extra cup of coffee that might be frowned upon in some office spaces, that sort of thing. So they have that kind of presenteeism issue, which is leading to burnout.
I think also time off in lieu can build up quite quickly, and this was another issue that I've had in the past where they said I had a toil mountain because literally I was just doing extra work, still not taking my actual holidays, And then when I did need a holiday, I was using my toil. So my holiday entitlement just stayed exactly the same for the whole year. And it can be really difficult to actually take the time off that you're entitled to when you've worked extra hours as well.
Yeah, I think we need to use that term in the office, Faye, a toil mountain. Not heard that before, but that would make sense, wouldn't it? Faye, sorry, I'll let you.
I mean, with toil itself, I mean, again, that's something, because as much as it's another policy written, that is something that you can have in place. We have a couple of clients that utilise that for some of the workers that work over their time and can have that time back. But it's just looking at how it's taken, how it's monitored, and if they're having to take it, is it over a certain period? How much toil can you accrue? And I think it's just looking at what works best for the business and how best to take it. Now, some of our clients, we do have a kind of mid-year, I'd probably say between April and June, communication go out to say, look, whilst we don't expect that you've actually taken all your holiday by this point, we do want to see some booked. Okay, so then that's creating that work-life balance, because we need to make sure that well-being piece is there as well. So by not kind of almost forcing their hand, but giving them some food for thought. When do I want this time? Do you want some time off in the summer holidays? And it's almost like the employer saying, actually, it's okay to, because it's coming as a prompt from the company. So where you were saying before, the employee feels a little bit, oh, should I be taking that? I'm actually working from home, it's a bit more relaxed. No, your employer is telling you, actually, do you want some time off? Yeah. And then that kind of prompts them to have maybe a look in their diary, their calendar, and organise what that looks like.
So you could even just stop working Mondays for a few months, and then it starts going down again. Just little things like that are great ideas, I think.
Yeah, I think it depends. It's whatever suits the business. I mean, as long as everybody's in agreement with what that looks like, if they've got a couple of weeks coming up and there's some flexibility around their working pattern, then that's something that's great and works. I get that not every company can offer something like that in terms of every Monday off for a time, but it's definitely something to consider and something for companies, management definitely to look into, to say, right, we've got this team, what a manager's doing, have a look at your team. Who's got this accrual, who's got this time, and maybe prompt them, have conversations, just to check in on people's well-being and making sure they're having that appropriate work-life balance.
Because I think that's a big part of HR as well, is employee retention and making sure people feel valued, want to carry on working for a company. And I think things like, flexibility with working hours, working arrangements, being able to work from home when you need to, those kind of things really make a big difference to how people feel working for a company.
Yeah, I think absolutely. You see what, going back HR terms 5 years ago, so we're talking pre-COVID, you'd have like essential criteria and desirable. We're now seeing working from home is no longer a desirable. A lot of people are requesting it as an essential. So from a recruitment market perspective, what we've seen is the pendulum has swung from one extreme to another. And there's also people that we have to be mindful of that don't really like being in isolation as well. So businesses have this real juggling act of people that want to work from home versus the guys that want to be part of the team culture, and they want that, they may live alone. Loneliness is a really big issue that Faye and I are dealing with almost on a weekly basis for employees. So whilst a client would ring us, for example, when they say to us, Natalie, I've got an employee who's really low because they are lonely. And I think realistically, we've lost 2 years, haven't we, with COVID, and we don't want to harp on about it too much because we've lived and breathed that for a long time. But flexibility and having that ability to just, I want to drop my children off before I come to work every day. Faye drops her children off at school before she comes into the office every day. The work still gets done. If Faye wants to work from home one day because she's got a delivery or something, that's not an issue. The work gets done. We have the technology to be able to operate that way, but we do appreciate that not everybody can do that if you're not in an office setting. So, people like some of our clients in the care sector and hospitality, you can't do that job from home. You have to have that. But what they can do is look at the rotas to see actually what does work, is there a shift pattern that we can put in place that suits everybody so that everyone's got a say. There is a way of including your employees so that, essentially employers get a much easier way of life without, the whole inch and taking a mile scenario. There is that balance and it can be achieved.
I think also having a workplace that people want to come and work in makes a big difference. So just little touches like having nice comfortable seating areas, nice breakout spaces, table football in the corner, everybody going out for a drink after work 1 day a week, those kind of little touches. And also, you know, some companies give you your birthday off as an extra day's holiday. I think that really makes you feel more valued.
Yeah, well, we do all of those things. Yeah. We don't have a tabletop football, but now Faye's got an idea in her head. So,
pool table.
Conversation with the accountant coming up. So yeah, I think it's all about the company culture. Some of those mechanisms suit everybody. Yes, Faye and I both take our birthdays off every year, just so that we've got a bit of a down day, and we can spend that time on ourselves. So yeah, it doesn't have to be anything massive, and it doesn't. The reward mechanisms, people think, oh, it's gym memberships, it's expensive, you know, vouchers and things like that. It really doesn't have to be so in your face, because employees are all at different stages in their lives. We've got 5 generations of different, you know, generations in the workforce now. So having that ability to almost pick and mix around benefits and reward mechanisms, it is actually one of the best parts of our job. We like getting involved with things like that and understanding what people need so that they can be happier at work.
And there's easy ways of kind of offering those incentives as well, aren't there? There's companies that offer kind of schemes where you can kind of buy vouchers and things for staff recognition programs and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a couple of clients, and I think they're quite big on what that looks like in terms of benefit schemes for their employees, again, just for that retention piece and to make sure their employees are happy. And this is anything from wellbeing days. I mean, it doesn't have to cost an awful amount, just maybe if the team get together, go off and do something. It's the team building, it builds morale. It gets you out from behind your desk. People really enjoy that and have something to look forward to. And another thing is, you know, that they might offer where you can buy some holiday. So where we said you've got so much, we can't take it all, it might be on the other, you know, where you've got children, you've got summer holidays coming up and you need that slight more increase to your annual leave entitlement. You know, some of our clients, they do offer a pay-in scheme so you can buy some holiday. So I think just having things like that and looking into what other companies might be around you doing, it's a great place to start to see what's out there on the market.
Yeah, it's the first thing that we look at, isn't it? What their competitors are doing in terms of offering, so that we can then ensure that they're being competitive in their own industries. Because coming back to that recruitment and retention piece, I was on a client site the other day and they said, Natalie, how on earth do we find the diamond through the sea of these CVs? They, you know, there's so much. They'd basically put an advert out on a very popular platform, we will call it that. Others are available. But what we found was that they had over 300 different CVs, and they've got one position, and they're a team of 13. So, like, how do we have the time to go through 300 CVs? And I said, well, actually, there's an easier way of being able to do this. So, you know, whether that is getting us to help out with some of the general admin stuff and having a look at what it is that they actually want from a candidate, or you can just do what I did and say, I need an extra pair of hands for my HR consultancy, and then a Faye pops up in your inbox. So, you know, I didn't really have a hard time with recruitment, but, you know, Faye's really gelled within the company massively, and I couldn't wish for somebody better to be working with every day. It's like, you know, we talk about all of the HR issues that are going on. We solve problems together. It's real team ethic. So yeah, I think that comes across quite often when people meet us.
Yeah.
I do think it does help a lot when you've got somebody else to bounce off, especially when you've got issues where you need somebody to just kind of be a sounding board for that. But it is tricky when you're recruiting, and I find it useful to have on some of these websites, you can have requirements before you can submit a CV. You've got these kind of tick boxes that says, do you have 3 years experience in this role? Do you have blah 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 blah? And that's a good way of kind of discouraging applicants that wouldn't go through that filter. But I think it's also good to kind of look at people's life skills and transferable skills, and not everyone's going to have the qualifications that you're after, but they might be an amazing candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm from a customer service background originally. I had no HR experience, and I've got no shame in saying that I failed my HR module at A-level because I didn't find the subject matter engaging. Simple as that. It was all mainly recruitment back then, so it didn't really, set my soul on fire. And looking at it now, I use a lot of my customer service skills through every day that I work. Faye has learnt hers through a completely different sector as well. So by bringing in that diverse range of skills, you're not having the recruiting people, what I call just like us scenario, where it's like, oh, you fit our company culture. Oh, you fit in, you can come in. And then 3 months later, we're having a probationary conversation because actually they may fit in personality wise, but they may not have the skill set that you need. And having transferable skills is so underrated. So whenever Faye and I sit in on interviews, we're asking some really strange questions, and our clients are going, why are you asking these questions? We're like, actually, we need to understand these points of the CV because that's applicable to the role. And if they can't explain the way that we feel that they would fit in with the client in terms of what they're actually looking for, is quite a good situation for us to be in, because we're then able to give a real professional view on it and say, well, actually, this will work out from this perspective and this will work this way, because they don't have that outside view that we do. Again, it's about knowing what you're looking for and how you can then articulate it into the working environment.
And do you think actually that's another common pitfall is with recruitment and not following the right processes? Because it's not as simple these days as just, oh, I like the look of that person, I'll give them a job. You've got to be able to justify why you've made your decisions and make sure your interview questions are ascertaining people's capabilities and that you've done some kind of skills matrix or something when you're doing that. This
is Faye's favourite. It's all about the discriminatory elements, and you may not have picked up on it, Chris, but one of the things you said is having 3 years of experience in XYZ could be seen as discriminatory in itself. We've seen adverts, haven't we, for school leavers or college leavers and things like that. And, back in the 90s, early 2000s, that was a thing. But now, if you've got someone who, essentially we're working or living and working longer, so you would have somebody in their 70s perhaps that would probably be quite interested in that position, but because they're not a school leaver. And it is as simple or as innocent as a mistake as that we find we're dealing with.
You've got to give candidates an idea of what you're looking for and whittle it down, because otherwise you will get 300 plus applications for every job if you can't say you need to know how to do the job to apply for the job.
I think it's just coming across with the skills and attributes the person has for the role and not as the person themselves. So whilst they have to be a fit for the company, of course, they have to get on with the team, because if that doesn't work, that could lead to a whole host of new problems when they start. And one, we don't want anybody upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. But generally aligning them and what their skills and attributes are for the actual role, I think that's not so much as of a discriminatory element, because if they were to come into the office, can you do usual Microsoft, how are you at Excel, how are you at doing this? I don't think that what you're describing that you're looking for has any element of discrimination there, but it's just ascertaining that person is viable for the actual role itself.
Yeah, and we've seen recent cases have been high-profile cases of what we call positive discriminatory recruitment exercises. We've seen it with the Metropolitan Police, which did not go well for them in terms of their backlash, because they were trying to recruit people from certain backgrounds and communities so that they were then able to service said communities. So the intention, it can be good in some ways, but ultimately the law doesn't see that distinction between one and the other. So again, these are the things that Faye and I pick out so that businesses don't then fall foul of that, because it can seem like a bit of a minefield, either recruiting or actually employing people. And we're starting to see some people that have decided, actually, I want to downscale my business because I feel like actually having people on board is too much hassle, or there's too many rules about it. How do I keep up with employment law? And again, it's acknowledging that you're not on your own and that there are experts out there that can help and get you on the right track so that it doesn't seem so daunting. because I know it's quite deep when we start talking about it, isn't it?
It is, but for me as a business owner, I'm thinking getting you guys involved with some of these areas is going to create an abundance of caution in a way that I might just think it would be so much simpler just to get on with it and not have to jump through all these hoops of making sure I'm compliant with everything, because is somebody really going to complain about my recruitment process? But actually that's the pitfall, isn't it? Because that's when it can all go horribly wrong.
Yeah. And it goes wrong very quickly. But again, it's about understanding what it is that you're doing and understanding that your intentions behind it. So, if you were, Chris, if you were going to recruit an assistant, for example, you would make sure that they were the right fit and they were able to kind of juggle, because you've got an extensive workload. I don't know how you have enough hours in the day and time to be a dad. I say the same thing to Faye, is like, how do you juggle everything? But there are ways and means of being able to understand what it looks like. And as I said, you don't have to have extensive recruitment strategies. It's not about having HR for HR's sake. It's just having the right tools. And one of the things we always say to clients, we're not here to sell you something that you don't need. We're here to just give you the foundations of what you actually need for your business, and we start to grow with you. So if you, by the end of the year, Chris, needed 5 different assistants because you really are still juggling, then you would be able to do that quite simply. It's not just having a load of policies that nobody reads, or having the right, you can't do that conversation, because a lot of the time people expect that from HR. It's like, oh, I suppose I can't do that. It's a common one that Faye and I hear on a daily basis. We're like, actually, you can. We just need to go about it in this way. So it's very pragmatic and what I would say proactive, the way that we work, as opposed to it being, well, you've done that. Well, that's the end of it, really. And it's just not really, it's not useful. So we like to bring it to life and make it a lot more tangible for people to work with.
I think one of the things that we're going to be doing on this podcast is talking about real life scenarios, answering your questions. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, I've got an HR dilemma, can you help me out with this? Get in touch. We'll talk about it on the next episode. Can you talk me through a typical example of a scenario where you've got one of your clients comes to you, there's a conflict between a couple of people that are working for the company. What's the process? How do you go about resolving that?
Again, this is one of Faye's favourites. Conflict at work is probably the most disruptive. It can be really, it's not just disruptive between the two individuals, but I think, Faye, you would agree that it really has a ripple effect through a company's business and culture. So
yeah, I think when you see conflict in the workplace, or whether it's just somebody being disgruntled, or it could be a whole host of reasons of why this has gone wrong. So they'll get in touch with us and say, we've got this person, they're slightly aggrieved with this particular thing that's happened. And then it's just about having those open conversations. I mean, ideally, it's not to let it obviously get to a point where it's completely been blown out of the water, but equally it's about management stepping in and having that awareness of their team to see the conflict, address the conflict, and actually see what's going on. I mean, obviously, in the case where then they need HR to step in, or just see what can be said rightly or wrongly, to have us in their corner, then that's typically when they'd call us to say, right, this needs to escalate. And it's only then, when it's dealt with slightly more formally, that we sort of get more hands-on to understand what that looks like. But yeah, it could be for a whole host of anything, really, that they'll get in touch.
It's having the courage to have those conversations. Yeah. A lot of the time people will ring us and say, Natalie and Faye, I know what I need to say, but I can't articulate it in a way that, one, is politically correct, and secondly, how do we move forward from something like this? So we tend to, Faye and I can work in a number of different ways. So a lot of what we do is what we call HR counselling, or coaching the line managers through these things. And it's important that they know that they're not on their own. And that's part of our service is, right, okay, it takes as long as it takes. We're not here on the clock. We can work our way through it. But the first thing whenever conflict arises, is not to react in that moment, is to, part the conflicting parties first of all, and then it's a case of giving us a call. We work our way through what's happened, how it's got to this point. But there's always these little niggles that start it off. So whether it's bubbling under the surface because somebody feels they've been treated differently and this person's getting all the preferential treatment for whatever reason, and that can really eat away at people, but it eats away at multiples. So that can, again, it's the ripple effect. You want to contain it, and we nip it in the bud, don't we? So we always ask the managers, like, if you see something that's off, or somebody says something to you that just doesn't feel right, or you think, where on earth has that come from? You need to address it at that point. So again, it's a case of telling us the good, bad and ugly so that we can then constructively have a conversation, nip it in the bud and move on. If you allow it to bubble, it does get much, much bigger. And yeah, it causes a lot bigger of a problem that you really don't need. So yes, whilst it may seem a little bit over the top of a reaction, actually nipping it in the bud is probably where your strengths lie.
I think conflict resolution is a big part of being a manager, and it's not an easy thing to do, but it's about dealing with situations fairly, giving people the chance to talk about what their issue is calmly, and resolving the issue and kind of mediating the dispute between two people rather than giving them a room in which to carry on arguing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole point, isn't it? It's just making sure that we've covered everything, not just from a legal perspective. We do that kind of without telling them the legal process, so you don't get the whole jargon or under the Equality Act 2010 you must do this. It's actually a more practical way, and we'll say, right, step 1 do this, step 2 do that, and then we regroup after every step with the client. So if they're not confident, then they will be getting comfortable with the uncomfortable after a while. So a lot of people say, oh, thank goodness we've got you guys, because we wouldn't know what we would have done. We probably would have done the complete opposite of what you've told us to do. And that's where many companies sadly go wrong, and you see all of these horrible cases crop up, and it's not done with malice. You look through the tribunal papers, you can see that the employer has tried to do it from a good place, but then they either end up overcommitting, and then again it gets bigger very quickly. So it's about understanding what those challenges are, knowing your people, and then working collectively to resolve it.
And I think also these things don't happen that often, so you don't get the chance to have a lot of experience dealing with these situations, whereas you guys are, this is what you do day in, day out. So you've got those examples to call on, and you've got the experience of dealing with these situations, that you know what kind of methods work with different sorts of personalities.
Yeah, I mean, generally, it sometimes isn't that one size fits all, but we do start to see what can work for certain companies. So when you may have a disgruntled party and they get in touch with us and say this has happened, it depends how open that person is to resolution. I think some people are just aggrieved to be aggrieved. Others, they want to see a resolution and they want to get back into a happy workplace. So I think it's just understanding and mitigating what that looks like for both the company and the individual. On a lot of occasions, the person just wants a voice. They want to be heard, and they want someone to take it seriously. And I think then that's when we step in. And once they start seeing what that looks like, and that we're open to having that discussion with them to say, well, how do we resolve this? How do you want to be supported in this? Then they start understanding, and it kind of simmers it down a little bit. So where we were slightly more aggrieved and it was a lot hot-headed, you start coming down a bit to say, well, what's actually going on here? Having that open conversation. It also helps slightly more because we're external. People are a lot more open to talking to us. Because you haven't got the manager.
They tell us everything.
They really do. I mean, you haven't got the manager that's sat with you day in, day out, that you think, well, you're already going to side with Joe Bloggs over there because you go to lunch together. We're an impartial party, if you like. So, warts and all, tell us what's going on, and then we help mitigate what that looks like.
Yeah.
Do you think there's often a situation where the manager particularly in a small business, the manager of the business is having a conflict with one of their employees, and there's a power imbalance as well as, two people on the same level having a disagreement. Does that make things a lot more complicated, I guess?
I was going to say, I'm going to let Faye take this one. It's one of her favourites.
Everything seems to be my favourite. I mean, I'm not here for conflicts. I'm not. Okay, so yeah, sometimes that can be the case, and sometimes it isn't the employees on the floor. This is coming from a management employee level where, you know, the team leader is disgruntled with somebody on their team or vice versa, and they're thinking, okay, so where do I go and what do I do in this situation? So if they're, you know, again, we revert back to policy. What does that look like? If you've got something that you want to challenge that you're not happy with, who is your escalation point? Where do you take that? And then usually this is then again where management comes to us and says, we've got somebody, they do not want to directly deal with their direct line manager, so we need to intervene. And again, that's where an escalation point can come again, because we're external. We can come in and have those conversations again to mitigate what that looks like, because, you know, the last thing you want to do is to put two hot-headed people in the room. Being manager or not, there has to be a point to come across that somebody else can take charge of that situation.
Yeah, and a lot of the time it's management not knowing what to do. So they might have that person that pushes the buttons and says all the wrong things and upsets the rest of the team and things like that. We typically get those in all of the environments that we work in, whether that's a care home setting, hospitality, or even a transport environment. We find actually it's pretty consistent across the board. There isn't one particular industry that this is related to. So a lot of it is the not knowing. So the manager will just say, oh, I'll get them in the room together and I'll bash their heads together and that will be the end of it. And that is where it then starts to become personal. And I think managers, if there's any managers listening to this, that they shouldn't take it personally. It may feel like, why don't they just do their job, or why are they just not telling or doing what I'm telling them to do? And that comes from a personal place, but we are human and we are emotive, so there will be those elements that come through, and line management can be quite personal. So it's about understanding not just the policy behind it, but actually having the mechanisms and the tools to be able to mitigate and to be able to resolve conflict management. And it's one of our biggest training courses that we do, on a monthly basis, is that people will come to us for conflict management training because they're not sure on the tools that they need to be able to resolve these things, and the scenarios that they come up against, they're not quite prepared. And when you look at the list of line management responsibilities, it's huge. It's not just a title, it's everything from knowing Dave and Steve's mental health and, you know, what's impacting their private lives, because gone are the days that you leave your problems at the door. Employees bring all of this to work with them now, and a lot of them aren't ashamed to put that out there. The kind of taboo curtain is coming down on these issues. So we're finding that people are being a lot more themselves at work, which is great, but it also presents a whole wealth of different problems. And, you know, it can be anything from politics right through to, you know, they've had a bit of a disagreement down the pub the other night. So the variation of different advice calls that we are getting at the moment, I would say is huge.
I think it's very interesting as well how the world has changed over the years, and now a lot of companies have got WhatsApp groups, and people might have conversations on their WhatsApp group that are completely not work appropriate, and people might have an issue with what's been written in the chat or feel discriminated against, and suddenly you've got that whole extra minefield of social media that kind of comes into the equation. Yeah.
Would you like to guess how many WhatsApp group clients calls that we get a week?
Is that a big one at the moment?
It has been, I would say, a trend over the past year, and we see it's the inappropriate things that have been shared, whether that is little pictures or GIFs, right through to really inappropriate language. There are some groups that we've had the displeasure of seeing where people have said, oh, you know, so and so is going to get sacked on Monday, and it's just because your phone is with you all the time. And if you've had a few down the pub on a Friday night, and then you're like, oh, you know, you're a disgruntled manager, for example, and you're like, oh, you know, you lot have been a pain all week or something like that, they won't think twice about it. Whenever clients come to us and say, oh, well, we've got a company WhatsApp group for that, and Faye and I sit here with our heads in our hands saying, not another WhatsApp group, because it's too dangerous, really, because you can't control what other people's actions are. But because it is a work WhatsApp, that it does bring into context the policies, procedures and everything else behind it. So it does keep us very, very busy. But on average, we're probably dealing with about 15 different types a week.
Wow. And what makes it an official work WhatsApp group? What's to stop staff members setting their own WhatsApp groups up? And is there any responsibility on the business of what goes on in those WhatsApp groups?
Yeah, there is. So there's a difference between what I would call a team that have set it up on the side and they all just talk amongst each other. What we call like a water cooler conversation has moved from the water cooler onto WhatsApp. That's just a conversation that they're having, and unfortunately, obviously, the organisation doesn't have anything in there to be able to, protect what's going on with that. If it's a work organised one, so this is really common in small and family run businesses, they'll have a group WhatsApp chat, and that is purely for, would you mind covering so-and-so's work and things like that. But again, if people are disgruntled like Faye was talking about, then they are likely to go on and voice their opinions on that element, and that is where things get mucky. So we tend to have, we do actually have a WhatsApp policy for businesses to say, well, this is what the rules are, this is what the expectations are, and just as long as you're clear with what that acceptable and not acceptable behaviour looks like, you've done what you can as a business to prevent that escalating any further. And if there are issues that come up from either WhatsApp or informal conversations down the pub, rest assured there is something that can be done about it. But again, it doesn't have to be throwing the book at people. There are ways and means, depending on the circumstances, that Faye and I can work to resolve it.
It's fascinating. It's such a minefield now, and you've even got things like people posting things on TikTok that they've made in the workplace that may or may not be, representative of the company's opinions, and chats on Facebook and Instagram. It's a whole new world, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I think this is there's pros and cons, like with anything. I mean, there's so much more social element here, especially in in the past couple of years. We've got more platforms than probably ever, and whilst that's great in terms of PR, getting your name out there, brand awareness, you can be over multiple platforms. Not so much obviously with WhatsApp. That's more of a group chat, but the pitfall of that is you are just so contactable. So where we go back to the work-life balance, there's just every ways and mean of work contacting or being that element of work, whether it's a WhatsApp group, whether it's on Messenger or any other type of social platform. There's that ability to constantly see work-related information. Where's the cutoff? That's what you need to ask yourself, because do you remove yourself? Again, that comes with you're in a group, then you've been kicked out of a group. That person now's disgruntled. I'm being left out. It creates this whole element of another situation because of that social element. Now, it's not to discourage, because it's great for brand awareness. Having your fun videos and seeing what the company is all about, and that's great. But it does come with a bit of caution, I think, and especially, please just see what's around you before uploading the post or video. You haven't got a board behind you noting all your client list, and it's things like that just to be very cautious of before entering into that.
People forget that, don't they? And you
Yeah.
see all of these funny, they want to skateboard down the stairs type scenario, really dangerous stuff. You see all sorts of strange things on TikTok and Snapchat and different profiles, but it's that readily available, all the time. And this is why countries like France and Spain are campaigning to have the right to switch off. It's actually already a legal requirement in France, and it has been proposed as a change in law in this country as well, where people can't be contacted outside of their working hours. I don't know how it would work in a British kind of culture, because we are quite sociable creatures, really. When we want to be, we'll have our social moments, and that's often ingrained in company cultures here. So it will be interesting to see if that comes up as a proposed change in employment law over the next couple of years.
I think it's the modern equivalent of not wanting to leave the office before the boss, and those companies that you used to have where everybody worked late because you didn't want to be the first one to close your computer down at dead on 5:30 because you get rolled eyes and kind of unspoken feeling that you're not pulling your weight if you're knocking off before 6 o'clock, even though your contract might say 5:30, and now you're expected to be contactable and answering your emails while you're sat there watching EastEnders in the evening.
Yeah. I would say, honestly, if I could go back to my original HR self all those years ago, I'd work all of the hours under the sun to impress my bosses because I was keen to progress. If I could go back and shake myself, I would, because I was so burnt out. And I remember going through, I was missing meals, and I was like, no, just one more email. And this is the issue that we're finding with people that work from home, because they're not visible. So they're starting to say, I'll send these at all hours of the night. Some of the things that I've seen from our clients recently, they've got a little disclaimer at the bottom of their emails that says, I've sent this during a time that is convenient for me. I do not expect a response straight away. Reply to me when it's convenient. I really like that. Obviously there are certain things that are more pressing than others, but just pick up the phone if that's the case and speak to someone else. If I'm not available in the office, Faye is, and if Faye isn't, then I am. So we do have a way of making that work for us, but again, it's having the time and the resources and everything but presenteeism is such an issue. It's a really big issue, but not a lot of people are actually talking about it, and it should be spoken about a lot more.
Do you know what somebody said to me at a place that I worked, but I was used to that culture of working late, and they said, can you just please leave at 5:30, because when you stay late it makes me look bad, because I want to go home, you're still in the office, and I don't want to leave before you. And I was thinking, okay, that's really nice. Yeah, I'll knock off at 5:30 from now on.
Yeah, you've had a standoff.
Yeah.
But again, that is a real issue. Especially, I find it more with probably working parents, that they feel that, okay, well, I'm taking a bit of a gap in the day to go and pick my children up from school and feed them their dinner and settle them down for the night. Oh, and I'll just jump on and do a few emails. I find that they do that quite often. So it's not just that group. Obviously, there's other groups of people that do it. But I do find that it's almost like people have a point to prove.
But I think also if you've got flexible working arrangements, then you might decide that you're going to work your 8 hours spread like 3 hours in the evening and have a bit more time off during the day to pick the kids up or go shopping or whatever. And it's just maybe people aren't working 9 to 5 as much anymore.
I do think that now, given the fact that there's a lot more parental employment rights in the sense of the flexible working, different types of leave are coming into play, I do think that is almost, should we say, squashing the typical, the norm of what a normal day constitutes. There's a lot more flexibility, there's a lot more hybrid, there's a lot more scattered working hours over the day. Typically somebody's working day, they might log on just maybe before a school run and do a couple of emails, take a proportion of the day, back on in the afternoon, back off in the tea time school pickup, and a couple of hours up till 6. But it's whatever suits that company and whatever suits that business. I think now, given the fact that all the legislation is coming in to better protect, again, not just parents, but I'll run with that scenario, the fact that that's coming into play, I think that is almost maybe seeing a turning point, that maybe it's not frowned upon when the part-time worker gets up at 3:30 because they're going to make us dash to the door and everyone's sort of rolling, well, I work here till 5. It's having that, it's almost having that compassion and understanding for what other people's needs are, because only because you don't need it in that instance doesn't mean it won't work for you at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the distinction that employers, again, aren't getting right at the moment, is what the different types of leave are. So Faye and I spend a lot of time trying to educate businesses around what the different types of leave are, what's paid, what's not paid, and how much they can take of said entitlement. Because, again, it's about making sure that, one, the records are accurate, because obviously there's certain connotations with different types of leave, but also it's understanding what is actually applicable to that person and can it be worked in a better way. So having that, again, is something that Faye and I run through all the time.
I think that has definitely given a very good idea of the range of topics that we're going to be talking about on this podcast. There's just so much to discuss in the world of HR, and I'm looking forward to the series of podcasts with you guys. And if you do have any questions that you'd like to get in touch with us, all the contact details are on the page where you found your podcast. But thank you very much for coming in today, and we look forward to further conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.